Hello, sophomores, and welcome to our first lesson of Unit 4. Today will be an introduction to the type of exegesis and studies that we'll be looking at this quarter. But first, let's talk about what we're going to read this quarter. We're going to finish up the New Testament this quarter with the last section of the New Testament and the last book. And if you're not familiar with the New Testament, well, the last book is Revelation, and the book of Revelation belongs in the section known as prophecy. And again, there's only one book, which is Revelation. So most of the New Testament's rather easy to follow. It's 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 1 history book, Acts. A lot of epistles, 21 altogether. And then the book of Revelation, which is the only prophecy book. Why is it called prophecy? Well, it's because it contains prophecy and is a series of prophecies. It also includes 7 letters in the beginning, so in some ways it's a hybrid book with 7 letters and then a series of prophetic visions. It includes prophetic visions and prophetic speeches in the letters. So let's talk about what prophecy is. Prophecy is, there's a lot of different ways to explain it. I think the best definition is to say it's God speaking through a prophet about the past, present, or future, and usually all 3, or a mixture of the 3. And God is speaking through this prophet in order to tell God's people what they need to know at that time that the prophet's speaking. So let me give you an example in a second. So again, it's God speaking through a prophet using the past, present, and or future to tell people what they need to know now. So let me give you an example. Imagine yesterday I told you that you weren't a very good friend. Why am I telling you this? Well, I'm telling you this because I want you to be a better friend today. So I'm using the past to explain what I want you to do today. I could also say, today I'm having a rough day and I'd really appreciate you being a good friend. In this case, I'd be using the present to explain what you need to do today. I could also say the future, use the future. I could say, you know what, if you keep talking and acting the way that you are, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. And so in this case, I'm warning you that in the future we won't be friends if you keep doing what you're doing. So in all 3 situations, I'm trying to change your action in the present so that right now, today, you'll be a good friend. But in one case, I'm using the past. In one case, I'm using the present. And in one case, I'm using the future. And so it is with prophecies in the Bible. Sometimes God talks about the past through a prophet so that the people know what they have been doing wrong and need to change. Sometimes he talks about the present and what's going on. And sometimes he talks about the future and what will happen if they continue in sin or if they change and do what's right. Finally, then, the book of Revelation, we'll find out if you've maybe read or heard parts of it. It's very different, but actually much of the weirdness of the book is not new. It's actually based on several Old Testament prophecies and other sections of the Old Testament. And so the Old Testament also has a section called prophecy, or the prophets. and it's parallel to the prophets because both have prophecy. Rather straightforward. So if you know what prophecy is, again, using the past, present, or future to tell people what they need to know today, then you'll know why Revelation is a prophecy book and why it's parallel with the prophets. Now, as we study this unusual book, or at least unusual for the New Testament, we're going to use a system called inductive study. So let's talk about that for a second. Inductive study. Inductive study you could describe as follows. One way to describe it is that you're not using preset goals or tasks. In other words, in this, as the quarter goes on, I'm going to tell you less and less of what you have to do. Usually in an assignment, I'll say, answer these questions or find these examples. But in the inductive study, you are going to come up with the questions that you want to learn about. So again, it's not using preset tasks and goals, but rather you come up with the goals that you want to accomplish, the questions you want answered. So again, you identify the questions you want answered, the things you want to learn more about. And so in many ways, this again is going to be more like real life. Most people, when they study the Bible, someone's not telling them what to do, but rather they read the Bible and they have questions and things that they're wondering. And so you are now on the final level, so to speak, of Bible study. When we talk about the Bible, there are a couple of particular areas that we can study the Bible, and depending on your own religious background, your own church background, family background, maybe you're more or less familiar with some of these. One way to think about it, I'm going to list these out, but I'm going to just draw a little picture real quick. If you rotate your screen, will be the easiest way to see this, but I'm going to draw a little picture of a book. And this book is going to be the Bible. And as we think about studying the Bible, we can think about it in a couple different ways. One way that we can study the Bible is by studying the things that helped create the Bible. So let's talk about this. We'll call this the past. Actually, let's call it the pre-Bible times. Pre meaning before. So we could talk about people who wrote the Bible. We could talk about events that sparked the Bible. Here's a little timeline. We could talk about places and why they were important in the Bible. It's a little house. We could talk about lots of other cultural things going on. And all this helped create the Bible. So for instance, let's say you wanted to study the letter of Philippians. Well, you might want to learn about the city of Philippi. What kind of people lived there? What was the city like? And then you might ask yourself, why was Paul writing to them? And now you want to know about Paul and about the events that were going on in the first century that might have sparked him to write this letter. But in all these situations, what's going on, what we're studying is things before the Bible, the historical, cultural, geographical background of the Bible. Then we have the Bible itself, and as we study the Bible, we might want to look at the words in the Bible. What do they mean? We might want to look at the ideas in the Bible. What is the Bible trying to say? And there's a lot of subcategories of those. Like we could look at the original words of the Bible in Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic. We could look at how those words should be translated into English or Spanish or some other, or Chinese or some other language. And we could look at the ideas in one sentence or one verse or a paragraph or a chapter or a book or a whole section of books. But in each case, we're looking at the Bible as its own, on its own. We're not necessarily concerned as much about what was going on before the Bible was written, although these questions are interrelated, as the people who wrote the Bible were using the words that are in the Bible, and they had their own way of using those depending on their culture and the events going on. So it's important to recognize these aren't isolated ways to study the Bible, but rather interconnected means of appreciating what it's saying. Finally, we have the world after the Bible. I'm going to call this the post-Bible world. And here we have mostly applying the Bible. And so let's draw some people here. And some of these people are maybe you and me. And how do we apply the Bible to our own life? Some of these people might be people who lived a long time ago. And we could ask, how did people apply the Bible 100 years ago or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago? And so these people are reading the Bible, they're learning from the Bible, and the words and ideas might mean different things to them depending on what God's trying to teach them and the things that they're going through. So altogether, if we look at these three sections, we're going to think this quarter about studying the Bible in its historical, cultural, geographical context, in its linguistic context and thematic context with the words and ideas, and in its application, applying the Bible to life today, and being open to how people have applied the Bible in the past. What might we learn from them, and how they applied it? What might we wish they had done differently, and feel like God is calling us to be different. Let's go back to the notes now, and again, I'm going to just take what I just said and I'll put it in some particular phrases. So again, the first area that we could talk about when studying the Bible would be the background of the Bible. The background of the Bible. And the background of the Bible, again, has to do with the people, culture, places, and circumstances or situations that caused the Bible to be written. So again, people, places, culture, and circumstances that caused the Bible to be written. And so again, some examples, we might say, who wrote Revelation, or who wrote Matthew, or who wrote Genesis, or Philippians, or whatever else. Whom was the Psalms written for? Whom was Galatians written for? When did they write Exodus? When did they write John? Why did they write Song of Solomon? Why did they write Jonah? What kind of writing is Ecclesiastes? What kind of writing is Titus? Any of these questions have to do with the historical, cultural, geographical background of the Bible. Again, a second way to study the Bible is focusing on the linguistic questions of the Bible. And this has to do with that book part, looking at the words in the book. And so this is related to the words and phrases in the Bible in their original language and in translation. Again, here's some example questions. What do the original words of a verse mean? What are the original words of a verse? Why are translations of this word or phrase or verse different? So we'll look at different Bible translations and why there are so many in English. And I don't know Chinese, but I can give information about that for our international students as well. A related idea of studying the Bible as a book is looking at the ideas in the Bible. What are they and how are they connected? One way to talk about this is studying the themes and structure in the Bible. And these questions have to do with the ideas in the Bible and how they are related. And then style is another key factor. So themes, style, and structure. Theme, style, and structure. What ideas are presented? How are they communicated? How are they related to one another? And then finally, we can look at the Bible today, and also other people have read the Bible since it was written, and ask, how have people applied the Bible? We'll call this application. How have they applied it to their beliefs, and how has it impacted their actions? Studying their beliefs would be studying their theology, and studying their actions would be studying their ethics, morals, what's right and wrong. So some example questions for this way of studying the Bible would be, what does this verse mean for me? Or a statement like, this verse should remind us to care for the poor. Or perhaps you've seen something in the Bible and said, is this why some churches do this or believe that? Or you want to know, how have others viewed this verse or issue? And so taken together, again, there are 4 main ways of studying the Bible, and they can be boiled down to this little image here. And I'm rotating the screen. You have the pre-Bible, studying the background of things that created the Bible, people that created the Bible. You can study the Bible on its own with its words and ideas, and you can also look at how the Bible has been applied in various times and situations up to today. Now we've introduced the questions in part A of the notes. Let's look at part B now, which has to do with answering these questions. And I'm going to briefly talk about some resources. We'll look at these, at least some of these, later on in the quarter. And then I want to ask a key question. So to answer questions related to the Bible, there are lots and lots of resources. Some are Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias where you can look up words or phrases from the Bible or related to the Bible. Some are commentaries where you can look up chapters and verses in the Bible. Others are interlinear Bibles and lexicons that help tell you the Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic words that are being translated. And then finally, there's lots of different books and articles and media and websites that you can gain information from. But as there's so much possible information, we want to know what is reliable information. Because the Bible is a controversial book. Some people believe the Bible is God's word, and they want to make sure others listen to it as such. Other people believe the Bible is just an ancient book that's misguided people, and they don't want people to listen to the Bible. And there are lots of other views of the Bible too. But because it's a controversial book, there's lots of websites, YouTube videos, books, and articles written with very, very different opinions. And so we want to know, in particular for this class, we want to know scholarly opinions. And so let's talk about the word scholar. You're in a school, and the word school is related to the word scholar. SCHOLARS. And let's define that word. I do have one definition over here. It does talk about men and women who have devoted their lives to studying the Bible and things related to the Bible. Another idea I include, actually we can erase that arrow. Another idea I include is that these people will create resources that not only reflect their own ideas, but also take into account the research of others. And so a scholar isn't just somebody who's read the Bible a lot. A scholar knows what other people have thought about the Bible. I once was at one conference, and someone encouraging young people to study the Bible said what it was like for him as he was in graduate school, and his professor basically, before he wrote a paper, he had to research what pretty much everybody had ever written about a verse in the Bible. And so the idea was that he was joining a conversation. He wasn't the first person to read the Bible. And so he needed to know, what did people say a long time ago about this verse? What have people said in centuries, not maybe a long time ago, but not today? And how are the ideas that people are sharing today similar and different? And why are people having the same opinion or a different opinion? And so one of the key ways to recognize a source as scholarly is to see if it cites and references other scholarly sources or other evidence. So again, cites or references. Other sources and scholars. This is one reason why, as learned as maybe a pastor is, or even what I do teaching you, I don't consider myself a scholar, or most pastors I know I wouldn't qualify as scholars, in that they spend a lot of their time counseling people. They spend a lot of time helping run churches and ministries. I spend a lot of my time preparing my classes and helping students who need help. When we're in school, I spend time doing chapel, but I don't spend a lot of time looking at what other people have said about a Bible verse. Maybe I have a few resources I check, but certainly I'm not an expert knowing what lots of different people have said about a verse or an idea or a topic. And when I present to you in class, I don't usually cite all my different sources I've used. And it's the same thing in a sermon. Most pastors don't cite all their sources. They hopefully have read different commentaries or books about the Bible, but many times they're speaking for the moment. And it's not a connection with a larger conversation that's been going on for centuries. So when we talk about scholarly works, what we're trying to do is connect it to all these other people who have studied the Bible for the past few hundred years. Another way to look at finding a scholarly source is by knowing different kinds of websites. And so usually the most scholarly website will have a N that says .edu. That means it's a college or university. And that will be better than a .org, which is usually better than a .com. But this isn't always true. Sometimes there are some great websites that end in .com, and not every .edu necessarily has a great Bible reference. Another way to look at to learn about whether a source is scholarly is the publisher. As you study the Bible more, you'll find that there are certain publishers that tend to make more scholarly resources, and others are more resources for people who are just getting introduced to the Bible. They're not going to have the complexity or tie in all these different ideas that people have had about the Bible. Another way to know if something's scholarly is the year it was published. People learn more about the Bible over time, and different resources such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, publication, come about. Publication. And so something that might have been scholarly 100 years ago maybe isn't today, because we've learned things about language or about resources that they just didn't have. And sometimes when you get free sources on the internet, the reason they're free is because they're old and they're outdated. So you always need to be careful, especially with the internet, about what you're getting. Speaking of free, cost can be another way to help tell if something's scholarly. Some books about the Bible cost $250 because they're using a lot of different languages, and the scholars put a lot of time to put them together. Other books cost $5 or get a free one for free. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not scholarly, but chances are it's cheaper because people didn't spend as much time researching, and the complexity of the book is not as much as a book that costs more. Another way to tell if something is scholarly is the tone and style. Good scholars, in my opinion, and the opinion of most others I've met, have a certain humility about them. They know they're not the first or only people to read the Bible or to think about the Bible, and so they recognize that they can only prove so much, and people might disagree with them, and there are really smart people who do disagree with them. Sometimes when you read a book and the person sounds like, or a website, and the person sounds like they're the only person who's ever read the Bible, that they are, usually in that case, they're not as scholarly, and they're not aware of the complexity of what's going on, and that other people have tried to prove and maybe haven't been able to what they're saying. Speaking about the authors, the credentials of the author are another way to tell if the book is scholarly. Does the author have certain degrees? Does he teach at a college or a seminary, a place that teaches pastors? Do they work for some institution that's focused on some way of studying the Bible? And Finally, then, again, as I mentioned before, it's really key to see different views discussed. Discusses different views, and even if they say they disagree with those views, are they able to say why? Or do they just say, well, anybody who is smart who thinks this, or anybody who believes in God thinks this? When you have a scholar or a supposed scholar making those kinds of remarks, usually they are not scholarly. So discusses different views, past and present. And finally, the best thing you can do, the number one thing you can do, you can star this one a few times. The number one way you can tell if something's scholarly is by comparing different resources. And this goes not just for the Bible, but for anything you're researching. If you only find one book or one website, then you have no idea if that's what most people think, if that's some crazy dude who just wrote this because he was bored and no one else believes what he believes. So by comparing different resources, you can get a baseline and say, well, it seems like this is the more popular view, or this view has the most evidence because a lot of different resources state why it's true and whatnot. But if you only have one book, if you only have one website, you can't you can't compare it to something else. So, with that in mind, let's look at a couple websites and see why they are scholarly or not scholarly. Here is a first website. This is by Northwest Nazarene University. And so already as I'm looking at this, I'm saying, wow, that's from a university, and it's a .edu. So I'm already giving it some props on the scholarly list. That doesn't mean I'm sold on it, but it does mean I am leaning more towards it's a good scholarly website. Now, if I look through this website, I notice a couple things. Notice how at the top here it says Bible and Theology websites. This is another sign that we're moving in the right direction, because this website isn't trying to say this is the only Bible website you should use, and we know things no one else knows because we're gifted by God in this special way. Instead, it's trying to show you other ways you can learn. So I could click on that link, and now I'm on a website with all these different Bible readings from the past centuries of Christianity. Notice it goes back to 1800s, 1500s. And actually, I'm familiar with this site. This goes way back to even the early church, right after the Bible. So the fact that website has that link means they want you to read these other people and what they think and be able to form your own opinion. Notice again, it has this digital theological library here where again you have lots of articles and databases, research aids. They're trying to get you to read and think and not trying to brainwash you. Religion Online, that looks like another resource of lots of different ideas and contributors. And so the fact that they're trying to get you thinking and thinking for yourself is all a good sign. That doesn't seem to be loading, but oh well. If we notice, too, was updated on April 7th, just last week. So that's a good sign that they keep care of it and they want to make sure it's a good resource. They even have links on scholarly versus popular, tips for evaluating websites. Look at that. That's a great resource. And all these tabs over here want to help you find good information. So I'm going to say this is a scholarly website. Here's another website. This is called the NTS Library. And as we look at this website, let's notice some things. First of all, they use the word scholarly, but does that necessarily mean they're scholarly? I don't know. We have to think. Notice it's a .com. Could be scholarly, could not be. Oh, here's some words we want to look at. This is a Christian online referral service library project offered by Northwestern Theological Seminary and Northwestern Christian University. So in this case, it's related to these universities, but it's not directly controlled by them, which is why it's not an EDU. So the fact, though, it's connected with these universities makes me a bit more optimistic, although anybody could say they're connected with something. So we'll have to see what we see if we find some good stuff. Notice the tabs in the left. We got some library resources. Let's see what we can find. Ooh, internet resources. And here's some different links to multimedia, philosophy, psychology. Looks like a lot of different links. That's a good sign because, again, they're trying to get us to research and not just brainwash us with what they think. They have PDF books. Let's see what we can get. Ooh. Free Christian PDF books. If they're free, they may be old or not as scholarly and that the people didn't research as much. But the fact they have other books, again, is a good sign. Notice our links change. It's not a great sign. There's an article directory. There's some resources in other languages, newspapers, classifieds. Now, one thing to notice here is that there are some ads in the left-hand corner. It's an ad for the college. And there's some other website ads. When you see ads, that tells you that this website is not fully funded and they're relying on internet ads. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not scholarly, but something to keep in mind that this website doesn't have enough support to run on its own. It needs ads, which means not as many people are buying into its ethos and mission. Again, that doesn't mean it's not does not mean it's not scholarly, but you just need to be careful. This website was updated in 2019, so at least a few months ago. So I'm going to say this looks scholarly. I'd have to study it more, but I might trust, I probably would trust the other website more in that it met more of the scholarly criteria. Finally, we have this website, BibleScholars.org. Now, this website is a .org. That looks good. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean it's Bible scholarly. It uses the word scholars, but that doesn't necessarily mean much either. Now, one thing to think about again is that scholars are trying to connect you to other people's point of view. I want you to notice how in the left here, most of what this is saying is just about this one guy, Dr. Blizzard. It's not telling me about the organization, it's not telling me about the research, just telling me about this one guy listing his books. In fact, it doesn't list anyone else besides Dr. Blizzard. And if you look down here, it just keeps talking about Dr. Blizzard in the bottom, Dr. Blizzard on the right, Dr. Blizzard's YouTube. Notice it doesn't mention anyone else besides Dr. Blizzard. So even though it's called Bible Scholars, it seems a little suspicious because he seems to be the only scholar. In fact, if we look at the articles page here, notice it first name, Roy B. Blizzard, Dr. Blizzard again. And look, almost all of the articles are by him. Here's 2 by him and some other person. And then notice there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other people mentioned, each with maybe 1 to 3 articles. So it seems, I'm a bit suspicious about this because it seems like he is the main guy and seems to be kind of trying to control what people are learning and how to think of these. And again, notice if we keep looking more, it's more about his books. Here's a person by another person, so that's a good sign. But again, it kind of ends. So it's mostly about his books, and then sometimes he'll mention someone else. If we look at the about too, there's a couple of things that we might want to be cautious of. Notice here it says that he is the president of Bible Scholars, an Austin-based corporation dedicated to biblical research and education. Notice he doesn't call it a society, it's not a university, it's a corporation. So basically he created a company and he's the president of it. So could he be trying to perhaps buy his way into being considered a scholar? Think about that. So here are some examples. Again, we need to ask ourselves, it doesn't necessarily mean, one thing doesn't necessarily mean it's not scholarly or is scholarly. This website was updated in 2019, but you just need to consider all the facts together. And so I'd say this last one out of the three websites would be the least scholarly, because it seems like Dr. Blizzard is trying to control the information. And in fact, if you read his stuff, he usually likes to say everyone else is wrong, and he's the only one who has it right. I'm not going to take the time to show you all that, but take my word for it. Dr. Blizzard likes to put everyone else down and think he's got the secret and should be the man. Other people seem to disagree, which is why he started his own corporation to promote his ideas. So with that being said, I am going to give you an assignment now. Besides filling out your notes and study guide, I'd like you to look at 3 more websites and tell me what you think looks scholarly or not scholarly on them, and whether you would think they would be a good, reliable resource for information, or whether you might have your hesitancies, like I'm hesitant about Dr. Blizzard Bible Scholars website, because it seems like he is the only scholar that he supports. You'll find the websites on Google Classroom, and the instructions are in the class comment section. Thank you.